what we call mind-body problem wasn't really a problem from the start, or not in the way we think of it in modern neurosciences or psychology. The earlier Graeco-Roman sources show an easy traffic between physical and mental. In their language, bodily parts and mental states are indicated by terms which work as interfaces between the two realms, the mental and the physical. In archaic Greek, it is appropriate to speak, in fact, of a continuum or many continuums, so to say. First of all, a continuum between body and mind. The terminology that is used in psychological descriptions, such as phrēn, thymos, the diaphragm, the chest or emotions, and kardia, hepar, the heart, the liver, really are located at the two extremes of a continuum. So it's really difficult to choose in translation whether it is a body part or a function of the mind that they are relating. Then there is a continuum between parts within the body or the mind, or the body-mind, between this psychosomatic unity. Nous, psyche, phrēn are different body parts, but also different functions that are visible in our everyday behavior. An example about this from Homer, so from archaic texts. In the Iliad, a character addressed the other, saying that like the heart, thymos, in your breast, so your limbs might obey, and your strength be firm. Physical features, strength, one's limbs, control over the legs or arms, and the thymos, the heart, but also the spirit, and so on, are placed on the same level. In the second example, Iliad 1, with rage, Menos, his black heart, phrēn, again, a translation that is not too literal, but it would be impossible to be wholly filled, and his eyes were like blazing fire. So heart, an emotion, eyes. In Book 10, so often did Agamemnon groan from the deep recesses of his breast, and sthetesin, kardia, and his heart, phrēn again, trembled within him. So this terminology is very rich, it multiplies its own references, and it's very difficult to choose between the corporeal and the mental. Another continuum is between soul and between psyche, between soul, and life. So psyche, which is probably the most famous Greek term that has been inherited in our tradition, has to do with the mental life, with the seat of the self, but also with vitality. It identifies the living individual, the living animal, and it leaves the body after death. Then there is a continuum between body and life. Being born and dying. Of course, the death, the termination, so to say, of the body or the appearance of the body through birth is what signals life itself. So both body and psyche, both sōma and psyche, have to do with life itself. Now, this is a soul that I mentioned in here, which is obviously very strongly embodied. And here, I don't use mind, as you have noticed, but soul, because soul, in some way, it is the more comprehensive term that you can find in English. The two words, mind and soul, bear a slight but key semantic difference in the English. The first one being more cognitive, performative, linked to judgment, and the second more personal, spiritual, and emotional. But these are oral qualifications, and in Greek, really, there is not such a binary alternative as the one we would find in our language. Then you have a continuum between individual being and world. There are certain words that are used to qualify the mind, psychological life, such as nous or logos, which have to do with individual functions and parts of the body-mind, but also with a way of understanding the world. And this is, I think, a good way to connect us to the first set of sources that I want to talk about, which is the Presocratic philosopher or early philosophers of nature. These philosophers were not concerned with the soul as individual, personal, subjective, as such as in our psychology, but as cosmological principle that can be thought. If you take cognitive words and concepts like nous or logos, for example, and an example here is Anaxagoras and his conceptualization of mind as nous, you have a clear, I think, exemplification of this. So mind, nous, he writes, is unlimited and master of itself. It has not been mixed with anything, but it is the only one to be itself by itself. It's pure thought. It is at the same time the thinnest of all things and the purest. So it is a material substance. It retains the full understanding about everything and possesses the greatest power. And of all the things that have life, whether larger or smaller, mind is master. Again, from the Presocratic evidence, Heraclitus speaks of psyche as something that is of course, part of individual ability to think, but also somehow coexistence and larger than the world. He who travels on every road would not find the limits of the soul, psyche, in the course of walking. So deep is its account, logos. Now, when the soul in relation to the individual body is thematized by natural philosophers or medical writers, this is done materialistically. The soul is part of material reality and shares its constituents. For example, this is just a slide with an image of a physician examining the body of a patient, just to introduce the materialistic side of this discussion. For example, Democritus. Democritus, of course, within his famous atomistic view of physics and of physical reality, writes that the soul is the same thing as the mind. So he identifies the two. And the mind belongs to the first and individual bodies, while it is mobile because of the smallness of its parts and because of their shape. The most mobile of the shapes is a spherical one. Mind and fire are made of atoms of this sort. So these two substances share the same composition. The soul is of a certain kind, fire and heat. The spherical ones are the particles that compose it, both fire and soul. And not only the soul as a thing, as an item in the world, but also thinking happens when the soul is in equilibrium after motion. Sometimes it can be too warm or too cold, and thinking, content, and abilities also changes as a consequence. Hippocratic medicine, and in general ancient medicine, is, I think, the greatest example that we can find for the way in which the soul is conceived as material. In a chapter of Regimen, the author writes that the intelligence of the soul, the phronesis psyches, depends on the material of which it is made, particularly a blend of fire and water. And depending on the quality and the proportion of this blend, there are different kinds of personalities. He finds 6 of them, 6 profiles, from the stupid to the intelligent, to the slow, to the faster reasoning, to the manic, and so on. At the same time, the material of this soul, fire and water, is the same in all creatures. So you don't really have a distinction between living animals and living human beings. The soul is the same thing in all living creatures, although the body, the sōma of each, is different. One can see how different it is from the differentiation between humans and other animals, for example, in Christian theologies. Finally, in my brief account of this materialistic side, the most important in terms of influence and philosophical elaboration is, of course, Aristotle. The individual soul receives great philosophical attention in his work, and his solution, known as the hylomorphic account of soul and body as form and matter, hyle and morphē, or morphē and hyle, in the Anima, is a fundamental chapter in our history of philosophy. For him, body and soul are interdependent, physiologically but also ontologically. Let us see how. The soul can be defined as the first actuality, the realization of a natural body, a sōma, potentially possessing life. So the body in itself is just flesh and bones and blood. What makes it a living body, a person, or an animal is the fact that there is a soul to give it to realize its full potentiality. And so, body and soul cannot exist without one another, just like a house cannot exist without its material, for example, wood, or without its design. The design might enjoy a much higher status than the mere matter. So, for example, soul is superior to body, one could say, in line of theory, but still, one cannot exist without the other. So the soul is the full realization of the potentiality of the body. And he writes, if then one is to find a definition which will apply to every soul, psyche, it will be the first actuality of a natural body possessed of organs. So one need no more ask whether body and soul are one than whether the wax and the impression it receives are one, or in general, whether the matter of each thing is the same as that of which it is the matter. The body is that which exists only potentially, but just as the pupil and the faculty of seeing make an eye, so in the other case, the soul and body make a living creature. So neither the soul nor certain parts of it, if it has parts, can be separated from the body. This is, of course, a very influential and important statement. Now, in parallel, and in constant challenge to these versions of materialism and determinism about the relationship between body and soul, which speaks well, I think, to some contemporary theories of mind, there is a spiritualist, transcendentist, dualist tradition, which look at the soul as a different thing from the body entirely, much more fundamentally higher order and separated from it, such as the divine and immortal sphere are separated from material and mortal reality. In this view, the body is contained to the soul and effectively a hindrance to it, indeed its tomb, as in the phrase sōma sēma, body tomb, that is found in mystic Greek texts and also in Plato. Evidence of this comes from Pythagoreanism and the Orphic tradition. The Orphic was a sect devoted to the belief in reincarnation and dualist spirit-matter relationship, or what we know about it. Of course, it is a very difficult matter. One fragment attributed to Pythagoras claims that he said the soul is immortal. Then it passes into other species of animals, and also what is born again sometimes after determinate periods of time, and that there is absolutely nothing new on earth. Everything is recycled and returned. Orphism, the material I was alluding to before, again restates the same belief. Of all things, the soul is immortal, but the bodies are subject to death. So the soul migrates from one body to the other. And what you see here is one of the Orphic tablets, golden leaves that were found in tombs around different locations in Greece, which contain kind of passports for the dead with instructions for the souls, what they have to do as they reach the afterlife. Plato is here a very important soul, as he reflects and attributes the language and uses basically the language of Orphic traditions. As he writes in the Phaedo, there comes to my mind an ancient doctrine, the Orphic possibly, which affirms that the souls go from here into the other world, and returning hither are born again from the dead. And again, the saying is uttered in secret rites, again a reference to the Orphic, to the effect that we men are in a sort of prison, and that one ought not to lose himself from it or run away. In the Heraclitus, some say that the body, sōma, is the tomb of the soul, of the psyche. And finally, in the Gorgias, I once heard one of the wise men say that now we are all dead, and the body, the sōma, is our tomb. So our mortal, worldly life is actually a kind of death. So indeed, Plato locates himself philosophically within this tradition, and he very clearly formulates a kind of hierarchy between body and soul based on this. Whenever soul and body are in the same place, in the same individual, nature directs the latter, the body, to serve and be governed by the soul, and the soul to govern and be master. And on this subject again, which one resembles the divine and which is instead the mortal? Do you not think that the divine is naturally such as to govern? So a very clear hierarchy is established. Mortality, materiality, and body should serve, and immortality, divinity, and spiritual should be, of course, in charge. At the same time, as a philosopher, Plato is acutely aware of the problems and challenges posed by our human biological existence and experience of mind-body interdependence, and attempts to solve them. So if the soul is so different and so superior to the body, how come that in our life we are so much subject to the interactions and the commission between the two? He's not really a simple mystic spiritualist. In the famous image of the yoked chariot, the soul is represented as a combination of a charioteer who has to lead a chariot led by two horses. One is white, spiritual, leading up, and the other one is dark, leading towards the earth. And of course, it is important, this is a way in which the materiality of the world outside is inserted into the image of the soul. In the Timaeus, more clearly, he speaks about an immortal principle or divinity creating humanity, again mixing materiality with the spiritual principle of life. And as a consequence, the body as a whole contains a spark of divinity and of soul in the higher sense, and the matter that takes towards towards the material world. So in this way, and here I conclude, with a small reference to the Christian body-mind, Western philosophy and culture inherit from the ancient two strongly defined approaches to the soul-body: a materialist, immanentistic one, and a spiritualist, transcendent one. The two tend to dominate clearly distinct contexts and genres, but also sometimes they are combined and enter in competition with one another. We have arrived, I think, far with these Christian examples here. When speaking of God, no one should think of him as something corporeal, nor yet of the soul, or your soul, anima tua, in Augustine, is God's concern, just as your body is God's concern, because God created both. So this is the Christian solution, so to say, to the tensions that I have tried to represent, that takes us very far away from the Presocratic beginnings of the story that I've been sketching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chiara, I have a question.
Yes.
Is mind and soul the same thing? Should we use the words differently today to avoid confusion?
I would prefer soul. I think that's in English, at least, as far as I understand. That would be anima, for example, in Italian or in Latin. I think soul is a more inclusive term, because mind has this strong cognitive and also,
Could we say mind is more philosophical and soul is more religious?
Yes, but soul is more religious and maybe by definition as such is more hospitable to all the other possible meanings. While not the opposite is not true. So I would suggest soul is the one that brings that all together and mind is the more technical term.